Greetings, thrill seekers. I am the master programmer, keeper of secrets, and collector of dark tales. Tonight, I bring you 3 unsettling stories uncovered by Lilith. These chilling accounts unravel curses, hauntings, and forbidden rituals that left villages trembling in fear and souls bound to darkness. So, if you're looking for a fright, something scary to watch at night, stay with us as we delve into these 3 extraordinary tales. First, in Drowned in Darkness, a Baltic fishing village is tormented by an unending storm and an even darker entity. What price did they pay to survive the tempest? Next, in The Curse of the Birch Witch, the woods watch with eyes of their own as a curious woman ventures too far into the domain of an ancient and vengeful spirit. Finally, in The Mistbound Coven, a village's history of fear and superstition awakens a curse that consumes their children, their sanity, and their very souls. These stories are not for the faint of heart, so sit back, turn down the lights, and listen to the eerie tales Lilith has uncovered. And if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our channel for more chilling stories and dark discoveries. Welcome to another journey into the unknown, brought to you by the Dark Files. In the winter of 1736, a small fishing village on the edge of the Baltic coast faced an unending storm. Day after day, the winds howled, battering their homes and tearing the sails from their boats. Fishermen claimed the sea itself had turned against them, as nets came up empty or filled with the bodies of strange, half-rotted creatures the locals refused to eat. The most disturbing part of this dark winter was the arrival of a mysterious woman. She was first seen on the edge of the village at night, her silhouette barely visible through the swirling mist. With tangled hair and eyes like ice, she wore an old, blackened cloak and carried a twisted wooden staff. The woman, known only as the Witch of the Sea, never entered the village. Instead, she lingered by the shore, where she carved symbols into the sand. The villagers stayed as far away from her as possible, hoping she would leave as silently as she arrived. But as weeks passed, her presence began to weave a strange darkness into their lives. Children awoke in the middle of the night, screaming of strange figures at the foot of their beds. The animals grew restless, dogs barking at empty spaces, and cows found dead, their bodies twisted in cruel, unnatural ways. The air itself felt thick, as if something unseen was watching from the depths of the mist. One evening, the eldest of the village, a woman named Marja, claimed she knew what had come to haunt them. She told of a demon, a creature who had once been summoned by desperate witches seeking revenge. According to Marja, this demon could only be called forth when one of her kin sacrificed something they loved to the stormy waters of the Baltic. Only then would the demon rise, and only then would it grant their darkest desires. Marja's words sent a shiver through the gathered townsfolk. Someone in their village had made an offering. That night, the priest led a group of villagers to confront the witch on the shore, but when they arrived, she was gone. Only the twisted staff remained, stabbed into the ground near a large, dark pool of water. The villagers stood frozen, staring in horror as the pool began to ripple, small waves lapping at its edge despite the still air. From the water, a figure began to emerge, its form skeletal, draped in layers of what looked like seaweed and rotted fabric. Its face was hidden, yet the presence it exuded terrified the townsfolk. In a voice like rusted metal grinding against stone, the creature spoke,
I am here for the one who called me,
it rasped. One by one, villagers turned to each other, faces pale with fear, each hoping the creature spoke of someone else. From the back of the crowd, a young man named Arrow stepped forward, his face twisted with guilt and fear. The man confessed he had summoned the demon in a moment of desperation, sacrificing the one thing he loved, his newborn son. He believed it would bring an end to the storm, and, in his grief and desperation, he had offered his child's life. But instead of peace, the demon had demanded more. An endless storm, more death, and more misery. In the ensuing silence, the beast turned its empty gaze toward Arrow and beckoned him into the water. The villagers watched in fear as he walked forward, legs stiff with fear. He disappeared beneath the black water, and the ripples stilled, leaving only silence in his wake. It is said on certain nights, those brave enough to approach the shore could hear faint whisperings coming from the sea, a reminder of the pact broken by the desperate father. To this day, no child is born in that village without a candle lit by the shore, a small offering of light to keep the dark at bay. At the edge of a small village, surrounded by miles of birch forest, lived a curious young woman named Kate. The birch trees stood tall and pale, their slender trunks covered in dark markings that resembled eyes. The villagers avoided the woods, saying the trees were cursed, that they could see you, really see you. People spoke of a witch who dwelled deep within, who could bend the trees to her will and punish those who wandered too far into her domain. But Kate didn't believe such things. She was drawn to the forest, to the quiet beauty of the white trees and the soft rustling of their leaves. She had always felt at home beneath their branches, even though others in the village whispered that the eyes on the bark watched her every move. The more they warned her, the more determined she became to prove them wrong. One evening, Kate decided to explore deeper than she had before. The cool autumn air whispered through the trees, and as she walked, the birch forest seemed to close in around her, the trunks seemingly moving closer, the air colder. As night fell, Kate found herself in an unfamiliar part of the woods. The trees here were taller, older, their bark more deeply scarred with strange eye-like markings. It was then that she saw it, a tiny, crooked hut nestled among the roots of an enormous birch, almost hidden in the deep shadows of the forest. The eyes on the trees seemed to turn toward her as she approached, a silent warning. But Kate, stubborn as ever, knocked on the door. It creaked open slowly, and from the darkness within emerged the figure of a woman. She was impossibly tall and thin, her pale skin blending almost seamlessly with the bark of the birch trees. Her hair was long and gray, falling in tangled waves down her back. And her eyes, black as the void, fixed on Kate with a gaze that chilled her to the bone.
"I've been expecting you,"
the witch said, her voice as soft as the wind through the trees, but as cold as the frost on the ground. Kate stepped back, suddenly unsure of herself. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The witch smiled, revealing crooked teeth.
"I am the keeper of the forest. These trees, they are mine. I see through them. And now, child, I think it's time you understood the truth of this place."
Kate wanted to turn and run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. The witch stepped closer, and as she did, The trees around them seemed to bend and groan, their branches creaking in the night air.
These birch trees you love so much,
the witch continued,
are not merely wood and bark. They were once like you, curious, unafraid. But the forest does not welcome trespassers lightly. The eyes you see on their trunks.
She trailed a long, bony finger across the bark of the nearest tree, tracing the dark, eye-shaped scar.
These are not markings. They are the souls of those who wandered too far, just as you have.
Kate's heart raced as the witch's words sank in. She glanced around, her breath quickening. The eyes on the trees. They were watching her, hundreds of them, blinking slowly, tracking her every move. "You're lying," Kate stammered, stepping back. "That's just a story." The witch's smile widened.
It's no story. Look closer.
As if drawn by an unseen force, Kate found herself staring at one of the nearest trees. The eye etched into its bark seemed to shimmer, to blink. It was no longer just a mark. It was alive. The pupil shifted, focusing on her, and in that moment, Kate felt a pull, as if something deep within the tree was reaching for her. Before she could tear her gaze away, the witch raised her hand. The wind howled through the branches, and the ground beneath Kate's feet trembled. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The roots of the birch tree twisted and writhed, moving up from the soil and wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down.
You have always belonged to the forest,
the witch whispered, her voice echoing in Kate's mind.
Now, you will see what it sees. Forever.
Kate struggled, but the roots held fast, dragging her towards the great birch tree at the center of the clearing. The bark split open, revealing a hollow within, and the dark eye in its center fixed on Kate with a terrifying intensity. The closer she got, the heavier her limbs felt, until she could no longer move. The witch chanted softly, her voice blending with the wind and the creaking of the trees. The bark of the great birch tree stretched and groaned as it absorbed Kate's body, pulling her in. Her arms, her legs, even her face began to harden, to merge with the wood. The last thing she saw before the darkness closed in were the eyes, hundreds of them, watching her, waiting for her to join them. As her body turned to bark, her mind remained sharp, trapped within the trunk of the tree. Her vision stretched far, beyond the hut, beyond the forest, and yet she could not move, could not scream. All she could do was watch. The next morning, the villagers noticed a new birch tree standing at the edge of the forest, its bark pale and smooth, except for one new marking. A dark, eye-shaped scar. It seemed to follow them as they passed, blinking slowly, as though it saw everything. Deep within the forest, the witch smiled. Another soul had joined her forest of watchers, bound forever to the eyes of the birch. The villagers still speak of the birch forest, of how the trees seem to watch those who come too close. They say if you stare too long at the eyes of their bark, you might feel a pull, as though the trees are calling you closer. But no one dares to go too far into the woods, for fear they too will become one of the watchers. A chilling mist descended upon the remote Transylvanian village of Borcha in the year 1699. Fear, as thick as the fog, settled over the reclusive townsfolk. They believed in the ancient spirits of the forest and the vengeful witches of the hollow. Legend spoke of 3 sisters, banished centuries ago, who vow to return in times of suffering. This winter, their prophecy seemed to unfold. A young girl, Eleanor, vanished into the woods, returning marked and changed. Soon, other children followed, drawn by an unseen force. The villagers lived in constant fear, their once peaceful lives shattered by the supernatural forces at play. The children, once full of laughter and joy, were now shadows of their former selves, haunted by nightmares and strange visions. The once vibrant village became a place of hushed whispers and fearful glances. Desperate, the villagers turned to Osnica, a woman versed in ancient rites. She warned them of a terrible price, a pure soul to appease the witches. As the mist thickened and the disappearances continued, Osnica made the ultimate sacrifice, walking into the woods to break the curse. The mist eventually cleared, and a sense of peace returned to the village. However, the memory of the lost children and Osnica's sacrifice lingered, a constant reminder of the dark forces that lurked in the shadows of the forest. Even now, centuries later, the legend of the Mistbound Coven persists. On nights when the wind howls and the fog descends, the villagers still hear the whispers of the lost souls, a chilling reminder of the price paid for peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our page to stay updated. Stay vigilant. The unknown is always closer than you think.